So I think the Western Force gave the Lions a decent test in the first half. They obviously came with a plan to play quick, play fast. They had some real standout performances, I think, from Dylan Pietsch, who was great ball carrying. I think Nick White was very good at getting the ball out quickly, but I think he also had the experience to slow down in certain situations at the back of rucks, which I think caught the Lions off from offside positions regularly. I think they won a lot of penalties that way, and they managed to get a lot of territory because of that. I think Ben Donaldson at the back was a great decision to have him playing in that 15 shirt. And I think he really put his hand up for these Lions tests to at least be included in the squad. But if the Wallabies go in the direction that I think they should go in terms of playing fly half and playing Tom Liner in that position instead of Noah Loa-Lacia, I think Ben Donaldson would be a really good selection in that 15 shirt, mainly because of his calming presence, his long boot that he has. And, you know, for a large part of the game in the first half, the Western Force were winning the territory battle. They were really keeping themselves out of their own half quite regularly. They kept it a tight game, given the talent deficit between their team and the Lions. So I think Pietsch, obviously for his running ability and also for him attacking the line at random points, could give himself a shot of getting in that Lions squad. Donaldson as well, although I would have thought that Tom Wright has probably got that 15 shirt more on lockdown, but if you want to go for a real kind of like flare fly half position, Ben Donaldson might be there as a great person to put in that 15 shirt for the Wallabies. Nick White as well, I thought played well, but obviously, you know, Jake Gordon I think is going to be the captain of the Wallabies, and they'll have Tate McDermott presumably coming off the bench to add a little bit of pace. So Nick White's probably got more of an uphill battle to get into that 9 shirt, but keep a look out for it. I think he definitely put a case forward for at least being included in the squad. So for the Lions, I think in the attack in the first half, I think they showed a lot more than against Argentina. There was a bit more cohesiveness, and I think there was a few reasons and a few selections for that. One, I think having Finn Russell at 10 was, you know, much better. I think he glued a lot more with the players around himself, quicker than Finn Smith did last weekend against Argentina. I think some of his interplay, even from early on in the first half, was excellent. That crossfield kick to Dan Sheehan over on the wing, which I'm smiling because I'm going to talk about that in a second, but that was excellent. I think he was great at giving ball looping backgrounds, very good at like gluing all the attack together, which I think ultimately led to a good attack for the Lions. But I think the defense was a little bit shaky. I think they got beaten back in terms of physicality from the Western Force. You know, a lot of that I think is probably the Western Force thinking that, you know, let's go hell for leather, let's go all out. There were some players in that squad as well that were playing their last ever game of professional rugby in Sam Carter and Ollie Hoskins, I think his name is, tight head prop. He literally got signed for like a day to come and play this game specifically. But I still think the Lions will probably look at that and think it's not good enough. They also gave away too many penalties in defence. They kept going over the top of rucks. I'm thinking of Ty Byrne and Henry Pollock specifically because of this. They kept going over the top of rucks when they were told, Ben Keefe told them without a shadow of a doubt, like, just don't do it. Don't do it. And they did it, and they gave penalties away. And Henry Pollock did it so much that he got a warning. And then the one time where he does a jackal and he actually wins the ball, he gets wrongly penalised. But because of all of this build-up, he gets the yellow card. So big thing, I think, for the Lions, especially in the first half, was discipline, not good enough, giving away penalties, getting physically battered backwards in defence. They will not be happy about that. Restarts were awful. Counted at least 5 restarts that they completely messed up. It is a very difficult skill. Sam Warburton, I think, made a really good point in the commentary. If you're listening with Sam Warburton as your commentary, he made a really, really good point that restarts are incredibly difficult to work out. You've got to pinpoint exactly where the ball's coming towards you, be able to lift up a man so that he basically lifts up in the middle of the air and he catches the ball in mid-flight. So that's a move that requires a lot of chemistry, a lot of communication, and it's something that you would hope the Lions will get in time. But you still want to be mentioning that this is a big working point for the Lions and what they need to get right? It just wasn't. It wasn't there. It wasn't good enough. The Western Force used its their advantage so many occasions. They knew it was something they could pick on, and it was why I think the Western Force had such a foothold in this game, and they were still competing up until about the second half when the replacements came on. And we'll talk about the second half in a little bit. Let me circle back around to that Dan Sheehan thing that made me smile. So Dan Sheehan's an excellent player, and I don't want this to come off in a negative fashion. It is actually really positive because you do need players like this in your team sometimes. But Dan Sheehan is he's obviously very physically gifted, and he's also very good with ball in hand, very good with running, and so I'm glad that he does this. So I don't want anyone to take away that I'm trying to put a negative spin on this. I think it's actually a really positive spin. Dan Sheehan reminds me of someone I used to play with in school. I won't use his full name, but his name is Dan as well. And Dan always he played blindside flanker, and he always got like the shit kicked out of him. He got ripped to shit because he always just used to, after like a scrum or something or a line out, he would just hang out on the wing, and he would hang out next to the winger. But it always, like, he got ripped for it incessantly, but it worked so well because having a forward out there, probably our best ball carrying forward when we were at school, having a great ball carrying forward out there is such a cheat code because it means that you've got someone who's probably physically bigger than a winger, and then you've also got like a 2-on-1 situation out there already. And if you can sacrifice a forward doing the work rate in the middle of the park for that, it's such a physical advantage. And you saw that from the crossfield kick from Finn Russell. Dan Sheehan goes up in the air, outcompetes the winger, drops it off to James Lowe. It eventually ends up as a try. But that is such an advantage. And it's not like everyone knows this about Dan Sheehan, but it's just funny to see something that I've recognised that someone did back in my long ago playing career, do the same thing, and it works so successfully. I don't mind it. I think it's a great thing because it's a physical disadvantage against the opposition. It's hard to defend against unless you have like a really big winger against him, or you decide you want to have the counteract of a forward out there, but then that takes away from your defensive structure. It's really, really cool to see. So we go into the second half, and I think this is where it turns into a bit of a blowout, and there's a few reasons for this. I think the Western Force bench, the quality difference between them and the players that started was stark. There was a lot more mistakes, a lot more knock-ons. They weren't of the same quality, which is to be expected. This is a domestic club side. This is not an international side. And then at like the 50-minute for the Lions, they bring on like all of their forward subs, and they just kind of start to run away with it. So that was probably the main reason, I think, why it just turned into no longer a competition, and it was just, Lions go away and tear away, and they win the game convincingly. What I'm hoping to see, and I don't expect this to happen in the first week or the first two games of the Lions, or probably even on Wednesday, but I would probably start to see from the next Saturday, probably this time next week when they have their next game. I think it's against the Waratahs, don't quote me on that. When we get to that kind of game, that's when I want to start seeing the Lions have the chemistry and the dominance of what they brought in that like 50th minute in this second half. I'm not one of these people that's like, Lions, they're not good enough. Why didn't they beat Argentina? No, dude, they need chemistry. Rugby, as it's gotten on, it's become more and more of an intricate game. It's not so much just like, head down, no tactics, just brute force. It's moved a lot further away from that. And I think that's made a much bigger difference as time's gone on, especially for the Lions, as an invitational squad that comes together once every 4 years and plays, arguably, Australia is a little bit further down the rankings than New Zealand or South Africa, but they play some of the best teams in the world, right? The challenge for the Lions is always getting the chemistry right, getting the coordination right, and like as tactics become more and more of as a thing, as a separator from the great teams from the good teams in this modern game, that is going to be something that is just going to take time. Games and moves, set moves and lineouts and even scrums, everything is so much more intricate than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago. These things take time. But I would start to get worried if the Lions aren't showing smoothness from the first minute this time next week. They need to kind of... It's a bit of an accelerated program for them to have some chemistry, but it's just the way it is. It's just they have to start having that chemistry going forward from probably this time next week. Don't expect to see it on Wednesday. If it is, that's a bonus, but that's it. It is what it is. Having said that, let's talk about some standout performances. Joe McCarthy gets man of the match. I think it's well-deserved. Really great game from him. Something that was a little bit more subtle that I think some of those of you that aren't so keen-eyed on line-outs would have missed is that I especially noticed this in the first half, and it interrupted some of the Western Force's ball off of lineouts. But there would be situations where Western Force would have like a line out on the Lions 5 metre line. And what they would do is, the line out standard line out, guy jumps up in the air, Lions didn't compete. Joe McCarthy's waiting at the bottom of the line out for the moment that the jumper hits the floor, and then he's in that position where, like, I'm standing head on to you, but this is like the Western Forces attacking side, and this is the Lions. The moment that the jumper like hits the floor like this, Joe McCarthy just comes from the side and puts his arm into the ball and steals it, and he did that twice. I've never seen that before. It's really clever. It's a good way of meaning that you don't have to have a weakness of sending someone up in the air to compete with a line out, but what you can do, you can just steal it if your opposition are not like straight away bound. It's very difficult to take a line out, catch it, and turn instantaneously to your opposite, to your players, and have a good maul drive off of that. If you're coming down, there's going to be a moment of weakness where you're trying to like brace and you won't fully have turned. And if you have someone coming in from the side here before an offside line is set with a maul or a ruck, he's just going to come in and just scoop that ball up. And he did that twice, and that was magnificent to see. And Sam Warburton, again, another great piece of analysis from Sam Warburton here. He mentioned specifically that Joe McCarthy has got a great chance of getting into this Lions test starting side, mainly because he's what he calls an enforcer. We're not on TV, so instead of using the word enforcer, we're just going to call him a big fucker. Yeah, it's great to have some big fuckers in your team. Every now and again, there's a time for like a forward with like a jackler, like a Jack Morgan or a Ben Earl, that has a great value. But no one really talks about the value of big fuckers anymore. Having a big fucker it really can separate your team away from being physically dominated to being the physical dominator. Martin Johnson, big fucker. Joe McCarthy, big fucker. Bacchus Bota, big fuckers. You need big fuckers. You need big fuckers to be physically dominant, and Joe McCarthy certainly is a big fucker. And I think he really will complement Maro Itoje well in that second row shirt. It's just that Joe McCarthy's not been of the same form other than today. He hasn't been of the same form, I think, for Ireland and for Leinster since he came back from injury. He had that injury where he was out for a few months. And I think he's been on the long road to recovery to the point now where he put in this performance against the Western Force, and he was back to his usual self with the steals in the line out, with the work rate around the park. He scored a try. His ball carrying was great as well. Good to see the big fucker back. Henry Pollock, a difficult player to evaluate. I think he got a lot of praise from commentary. He was guilty of the yellow card, which even though I thought the Jackal was clean in what he did, he put himself in the position of being susceptible for giving himself the yellow card because he kept getting warned of going over the top of rucks when he shouldn't have been doing that. I think that's why the yellow card came out, as I've said. He made some knock-ons, but then there was also, the superb play of why Henry Pollock's so good. That pop-off to Van der Fleer to then loop back round, take the pop-off back from him and make a line break that eventually scores the try for Thomas Williams was class. That's what you want to see from him. That's what we like from him. The chip and chase, which was kind of like a carbon copy of what he's done in the Premiership, I think against Sale. That was excellent to see. I don't know. Like, I feel like he has a chance of being in that Lions starting 15, just because there's not like an out and out number 8 other than maybe Jack Conan, that is, the superstar. Like, I would have thought Caelan Doris would probably have been that. So I think there's a chance for Henry Pollock, but it's too there's too much bitter and sweet, I just kind of want to see a little bit more of like consistent play. And I don't think we've really seen that from Henry Pollock since that semi-final game against Leinster. Up until that point, he was just, I think, from watching that Castres game in the quarterfinals again in the Champions Cup, all the way through to that semi-final, he was like best player on the pitch in whatever game he was playing in. And I think ever since that semi-final, there's been like, 2 steps forward and 1 step back in his performances. And I just want to see him like just have a solid like 80 minutes where he is that again, because he's not that at the moment. And at the moment, I don't think he's starting the Lions test. So he may not even be on the bench in the form that he's in, because there's absolute elements of excellence. There's getting under the skin of the opposition, which are all super positives. And then there's just bits and pieces like just silly knock-ons, silly penalties. And you will also see it in the first half. I thought the Western Force did target him when he was a guard at a ruck. What I mean by a guard is like the first defender from the outside of rucks. I think the Western Force were targeting him, thinking that he would be an easier target to run over than other players. It's just something to watch out for. And he's obviously going to be the talk of this team, etc., because of how young he is, because of the personality he is, because of the media he brings. But I thought it was worth talking about his performance being a little bit forwards and backwards. As I said, I think Finn Russell was excellent. I think he's put himself up as like, I am the number 10 for the Lions. Thomas Williams, I thought, played really well, and then unfortunately has an injury in his hamstring. We don't know the full what's the word I'm looking for? The full story about what's going to happen with this injury, whether it's serious or not. We won't know for a few days, but I really hope it's not. I think, obviously Gibson Park's been injured at the moment, and I think Alex Mitchell's been okay for the Lions, but I definitely think when Thomas Williams came on last weekend against Argentina and the game that he had against the Western Force today, I think he's been the better scrum half, and it would have been a great story for him to continue that form and make his way into that Lions test series, just because I feel like when the Lions selected 3 scrum halves of Alex Mitchell, Jameson Gibson Park and Thomas Williams, I think most people would put Thomas Williams at like the lowest pecking order, so it would have been a great underdog story to see him go all the way. So I hope the injury's not too bad. If he does get injured and it's going to be longer than like a few days, I would expect Ben White to be the scrum half going. A lot of the talk, and the commentary talk I think was bad on this, where they were saying, it's going to be Jack Van Portfleet. It's not going to be Jack Van Portfleet. Yes, Jack Van Portfleet was in the training squad for the Lions, but the reason for that is because Ben White was still playing for Toulon in the top 14, and that weekend they literally had a semi-final to play last weekend. So now that Toulon are out of the top 14, I fully expect Ben White to be on the plane if Thomas Williams is injured. Hansen, I think, was great work rate, but again, it was also marred by some mistakes, that crossing penalty. And I also think that Elliot Daly had a great game at 15. Another one of those players that I think is probably third in that pecking order of playing 15. But Blair Kinghorn isn't part of the squad yet because he has got that top 14 final left with Toulouse. And Hugo Keenan's still injured. And so, if Keenan stays injured and Kinghorn doesn't quite glue with his team, I could fully see Daly starting in that 15 shirt for the Lions. He's very much like Keenan in terms of like mistake-free. 8 out of 10 every time he plays. A very calming force in that 15 shirt. Much like I imagine Donaldson would be a great 15 to pair with Tom Liner at fly half. Finn Russell at fly half and having Elliot Daly at 15, I think would be a great mismatch as well. Finn Russell, I think, would feel a lot more free to just kind of do whatever the hell he wants in terms of trick plays, etc. And he knows he's always got that stability of Daly behind him, knowing where he is defensively in terms of kick returns, and also has a hell of a boot on him for clearing kicks as well. So look out for Daly to keep playing in that 15 shirt. Also, Marcus Smith came on at the 60-minute mark. The game was already won by that point. And as I was talking about, the game was like, it wasn't even a competition at that point. It felt like a training drill. What I would like to see for Marcus Smith, and I think Wednesday's game against, I believe, the Queensland Reds is a great opportunity for this. I would love to see Marcus Smith start and play a full 80 minutes. I think the way that Marcus Smith plays very much relies on chemistry with the players around him. Reason being for that is because he's so unpredictable for the untrained eye, brain, all the senses. That really works to his advantage against defences. They don't know what he's doing at any point, but it can also work as a disadvantage for him playing at 10 because sometimes his own players don't know exactly what he's going to do. He really needs to have a chance in this Lions team. I think he really needs a chance to just have full 80 minutes with the players around him, like inside centre and scrum half. They all get a sense and feeling of like, okay, Marcus is going to do this. He's lined up to do this. I feel like I know I've seen him do this before. It's all a chemistry thing. Marcus Smith works well with more chemistry within the team around him. So next Wednesday, I want to see Marcus Smith play a full 80. And yeah, that's it. The last thing I'll say as well is I feel like the Lions have been watching the Illuminati. I'm just kidding. This small YouTube channel, we got our own little corner of the internet, sure. But one of the things that I mentioned in my not watched at all video from earlier in the week is, what do the Lions need to do differently to go from their performance against Argentina to having a fighting chance against the Wallabies? And what do they do today? Same things, right? Willing to play with ball in hand, even in their own 22, give it a go. Off of set pieces and stuff like that, they were willing to just, there was space in the defensive line. Rather than just kick it away, let's have a go and see what we can do. There was a turnover, I believe, in their own 22, and they turned that into a try as well, just because they played out of their own 22 and they're willing to do it. Play with ball in hand, which means that they were then less worried about the scrum, which I thought was a good point for them today. It wasn't as dominant as it was against Argentina, but it was still pretty good. And the line-out was much more improved, I thought. Sometimes I get things right. It's difficult sometimes being in this media industry when I'm not a coach. I've never played at a high level, but it's nice to see sometimes the things that I say are definitely kind of like the directions that professional teams or professional outfits go in. It's cool to have that validation. And that's it. I guess I'll have a signing off note that I think Ben O'Keefe had an excellent game at referee. I think the thing to note as well that they did note in the commentary is that he's going to be the referee of the first test. That's kind of a big deal because of how he will referee the game. There wasn't much jackling that was called. The advantage was always to the attacker. I think that's an important thing to note. But in general, the reason that I think Ben O'Keefe had such a good game was not because of that. Sometimes, as I said, with the yellow card for Henry Pollock, which I didn't think it was a yellow card, I didn't even think it was a penalty. You just want consistency. And I think that's what Ben O'Keefe gave today. He gave it the same decisions and the same thought processes, was the same at the second minute of the game through to the 72nd minute in the game. So that's all you can really ask for. And I genuinely think that Ben O'Keefe's probably the best referee in the world right now. I think Nika was probably competing for that position, but he had an awful Champions Cup final. But I genuinely feel that, Ben O'Keefe's, he's the man. He's a real dude. He's a real one. But that's it. I'll see you on Wednesday. If not, maybe I'll see you sooner for one of these other international games that are happening. A great game, and I think the Lions really kind of brought it together and had some cohesion, which they didn't show as much against Argentina. So, I'll see you in the next one.